Part 1. My grandfather was a combat pilot. Even though he always felt distant, I liked him. When I grew older, I realized that he was always aware, always looking for any signs of danger. Shell shock, PTSD, it has many names. My mother told me he didn't used to be like that he changed when he came back from Vietnam. My grandpa's profession was likely the reason why I was obsessed with space, astronauts, planes, and pilots. We used to talk about it when we were together. He was a really skilled and high-ranking officer in the Army, and he knew some people, even a couple of really well-known astronauts. When I once asked him if he met anyone who went to the moon, he simply replied, "Don't ever talk to me about the moon, boy. It's a dark and evil place." He died back in 2004 from natural causes. About 2 months ago, we decided to renovate my grandparents' old house. While clearing out the attic, I found an old metallic box. In the box, there was a number of things which I assumed belonged to my grandfather. There was a military medal, a stack of papers, and an old picture of my grandfather and 2 other men I didn't recognize. My grandpa looked around 40, so I assumed that the picture was taken in the 70s. All of them were wearing spacesuits, and the scene was a typical backdrop used by NASA, but the logo was missing. Only a blank, monochrome background. The mission patch was titled Dawnbreaker. I didn't understand anything. My grandfather was an astronaut? Why did he never tell anyone about this? Dawnbreaker. I never heard about such a mission. It must have been covered up really well. But why? I found the answers in the papers on the bottom of the box. I'll recount the literal contents now, but I warn you that many people might find it very disturbing. My dear family, if you ever find this, I must confess something. In 1972, I wasn't in Vietnam. I wasn't supposed to tell anyone, but if you have found this, it probably doesn't matter anymore. Back in 1965, me and a handful of other pilots were selected for a non-public team of astronauts who would participate in covert missions in space for our government. We wouldn't get the glory and fame of regular astronauts, but our country needed us, and so we were there. In early 1972, we were told that for an unspecified period of time, our country had a secret satellite orbiting the moon. They never told us what it did or why it was there, just that a few weeks prior, it had crashed to the surface on the dark side of the moon for unknown reasons, and that the data it carried was crucial. The government needed to recover it, and thus was sending me and 2 other astronauts to reclaim the satellite's memory module. The equipment of the planned Apollo 18 mission was essentially transferred to us. From what we'd been told, the Apollo team was furious. They had a reason to be, after all. It seemed that whoever we've been under was much more powerful than NASA. The whole mission was top secret, obviously. I was officially deployed to Vietnam, while in reality we underwent extensive training for the mission. After a couple of months, we found ourselves standing on the launch pad in front of this behemoth of a rocket that would take us to the moon. I was the mission commander, while Lieutenant Carver was the Lunar Excursion Module, LEM pilot, and Lieutenant Ackerman was the Command Service Module, CSM pilot. The flight to the moon took roughly 3 days. After arriving, we made a couple of orbits around it. Each time we flew behind the horizon created by the moon itself. I felt a bit of helplessness when our communication to the whole world went dark, as the signal got obscured by the spherical mass of rock and dust below us. The dark side of the moon was nothing like the light side, which we see on almost a daily basis. Instead of smooth, gray fields and tranquil lunar seas, it was completely covered in dark, deep craters and holes, like as if it was being slowly eaten away by the universe itself. It was finally decided to begin the descent to the surface. Me and Carver exchanged wishes of good luck with Ackerman, and in the lunar module named Charon, we separated from the CSM named Trinity. After we announced, Charon has touched down, our response wasn't cheers and applause, but just a mere,
"This is Trinity. Congratulations, Charon. I'll relay the news on the other side. Be safe out there, pals."
Just like that, we became cut off from the rest of the world. Ackerman was our only link. While he was above the light side, he could communicate with ground command, and while above the dark side, he could communicate with us. Never both at once. Even though the CSM's orbital period was roughly 2 hours, we would be in touch for only about 35 minutes each orbit. We landed on a flat plain inside a huge crater. Contrary to what some people believe, the sun shines at the dark side of the moon the same way as the light side. The amount of light depends on the lunar phase. It was still shining daylight in the place where we landed, but we knew it would go dark in a few days. I felt excited and curious about what awaited us in this alien world. We waited for about an hour and a half to get the command's reply from Ackerman and spent the time preparing our suits.
"Command sent their congratulations. You're to proceed with the recovery."
Everything was dead silent as I stepped on the surface of the moon. I tried to think of something inspiring to say, but those times were already over. With Carver, we assembled the rover, and after planting our flag next to our spacecraft, we drove off. As we drove across the surface, I saw what I thought was a flash, like a glare reflected by something metallic in the far distance. Since it was fairly common to see flashes of light because of an interesting physical phenomenon caused by the space radiation interacting with our eyes, I didn't give it much thought and soon forgot about it. After driving for a couple of hours, we reached the satellite, or what was left of it. We immediately noticed that something wasn't right. There were dozens of footprints around the probe, leading to a set of 2 tracks, dragging out into the distance.
"What the hell is this?"
asked Carver in disbelief. "I don't know, but it seems that somebody got what we came for before us," I replied. Both the tracks and the footprints were different than ours. Whoever took the data wasn't here under the American flag. As I expected, we didn't find the data box. We found the part where it was supposed to be, but it was missing. Luckily for us, we were just in contact with Ackerman, so we reached out to him to describe our findings.
"That doesn't make any sense. Who would take it? Russians? They don't even have a lunar program. Even if somebody took it, how could we not be aware of that? How can the Russians land on the moon without us noticing?"
He responded.
"As far as we know, the Russians have no idea that we are here,
said Carver over the radio. "We're going to follow the trail." I cut off their conversation.
"Are you guys sure about this?"
asked Ackerman.
"Hell, I'm not sure about this. We're clearly missing something here. But I'll do as you say, Cap,"
responded Carver. Yes, if whatever was on that probe was so important for 2 countries to send people here to retrieve it, we have to find out what happened to it, I replied.
"Copy that, Charon. I'll relay your whereabouts to command as soon as I can. Be careful out there."
Our oxygen was about at half capacity now, but we moved on with hopes of solving this mystery. It wasn't long until we saw something in the distance. As we got closer, I realized that there was a spacecraft. Its design was different than ours, and it was decorated with a flag of the Soviet Union. I couldn't explain why, but I felt that something was really odd about the spacecraft. If there really was Russians with us on the moon, they would have picked up our comms long ago, so there wasn't a point in hiding.
To the unidentified Soviet lander, this is the crew of Dawnbreaker. Please respond. We know you're here. We have you in sight.
Nothing. We attempted to contact them several times again, both in Russian and English, but always received only silence in response. We got closer, and I realized why I found the spacecraft odd before. It looked like it had been there for a while. We didn't see much of the interior through the small windows, which had been covered with something from the inside.
Our air is running low and I don't like this, Miller. We should really head back now,
said Carver with clear uneasiness in his voice. I know, but we have to find out what's going on here. It took some time until we figured out a way to open the airlock. No one was home. The inside was a mess. The interior was splattered with brownish-red fluid, presumably contents of one of the many opened food packages lying on the floor. Or was it? No, I quickly pushed that thought out of my head. It was a two-seater craft. There was a small amount of leftover supplies and samples, but no sign of the satellite's black box. There was a spacesuit hanging on the wall near the airlock. 2 occupants, and 1 spacesuit with a clearly missing name tag. We both realized that the other one must still be out there somewhere, along with its occupant. At this point, we were really low on oxygen, so we rushed to get back to our spacecraft. As we reached Charon with the last bits of oxygen in our suits, I realized something.
Tell me, Carver, was it just me? Or did we not pass the wreckage on our way back?
I asked.
Fuck. Don't even mention it. It wasn't there. That's right.
We shared our intriguing discovery with Ackerman later, and he was as surprised as was Command when he informed them in turn. That night, I took watch for the first 4 hours. It wasn't really a night since the sun was still shining, but for the sake of timekeeping, we referred to the time when we slept as night. When it was finally my turn to sleep, I had a dream about following the flash that I saw the previous day. I walked on and on until I found the same spacesuit from the Russian craft just lying there in the dust. The limbs were twisted and contorted in gruesome ways, but it was clear that someone or something was inside that suit. I approached and slowly began opening the sun shield that obscured the inside of the helmet. I looked in terror as I saw the inside. It was my face, covered with brownish-red blood. In place of eyes, there were only 2 gaping holes. The next day, we started picking up something on an unused channel of our radio. It was a faint signal coming from somewhere in the crater. We tried to patch it into the speakers, but it didn't make any sense. It was just a repeating sound resembling a person vocalizing the sound of a single letter or vowel, but stretched to about 3 seconds, followed by an equally long pause. It was very distorted, and it clearly wasn't a loop, since each sound was just slightly different than the previous one. We ate, and once again prepared for moonwalk. It was darker than the other day. The sun was still shining, but it was steadily creeping its way under the horizon. We followed the source of the signal for about an hour when we found something lying in the dust in front of us. I tensed as I looked closer and found out what it was. It was a spacesuit, the same as the one in the Russian lander.
Well, it looks like we found our missing friend,
said Carver with disbelief. I didn't say anything. I simply jumped off the rover and slowly, silently approached the suit.
What are you doing, Miller?
Continued Carver. Just as I was about to open the sun shield with my shaking hands, the suit came alive and grabbed my hand. With the sound traveling through our suits, I heard a weak "Pomogitya," meaning help me in Russian. We carried him to our lander. The patch on his suit revealed his identity as Tarkov. He was in shock and hypoxic. I don't know how long or why he was just lying there, but he was lucky to be alive. For the next couple of hours, he fell in and out of consciousness. He eventually woke up. Our Russian was poor, but luckily he spoke English enough for us to understand each other. He didn't remember why he was there, what had happened to him and his crew, or what his mission was. When I looked out of the window, I realized that our flag was gone. There were no footprints. It looked like it had simply vanished. At this point, each one of us was really concerned, and we asked to terminate the mission. Command refused, explaining that the recovery of the satellite's data was of paramount importance. We decided to continue our search tomorrow and went to sleep. I again had the same nightmare as the day before. I woke up terrified and drenched in sweat. I saw Tarkov standing by the window and looked out. He then walked over to Carver and just stood there, looking at him while he slept for about a minute or two. Quietly, I asked him, "Tarkov, what are you doing?" But he just mumbled something like, "Dem," or "when," and lied down. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and I kept an eye on him. But nothing interesting happened. The next day, we found a picture or a map of the crater we were in and a pocket in Tarkov's suit. There was a point a few miles from where we were that was marked with a cross. Tarkov didn't know what was there, but I soon realized that it was right in the direction where I saw the flash on the first day. We had to check it out. Me and Carver later took off and headed towards this mysterious target, while Tarkov stayed in the Karen. In reality, our rover had enough power to carry all three of us, but I insisted that it didn't, and that he should stay behind.
I don't trust this guy,
I said to Carver after I was sure that Tarkov was out of range of our short-range radio.
We land on the moon. We don't find the box, and suddenly the probe is gone. Then we find a supposed-to-be-dead Russian who doesn't remember when the last time was he took a shit. And now we're heading towards an inconspicuous place that was marked on his map he knows nothing about. You bet I don't trust him. Hell, I don't trust a single step I take in that direction,
he replied.
What are we going to do with him?
He asked later.
I don't know yet, but we can't take him with us. Neither the LEM or CSM is built for an extra passenger, you know that,
I responded.
And I'm afraid he knows that too,
replied Carver. The sun was setting. After driving for a while, we reached something that puzzles me to this day. Right there, in front of us, was something I can only describe as a three-sided pyramid. It was about 10 feet tall, and its surface was completely smooth and black as night.
What in the world is this?
asked Carver with a shiver in his voice. We walked around it and took pictures.
What the fuck?
I suddenly heard through my radio. I turned around and saw Carver frozen in place, staring at something. There, in the remaining faint light, was a spacesuit about 20 feet away from us. I recognized the missing name patch and realized that it was the suit from the Russian spacecraft. It was standing upright, on its feet. The sun shield was open to reveal a sight that terrifies me to this day. It was empty. The suit was empty, but it was standing upright. I came back to my senses after I heard a crackling noise coming from my radio. It spoke in a low, deep, distorted voice. Then, out of nowhere, I was blinded by an intense flash of light. When I recovered, the thing was gone. "Carver, are you all right?" I asked. He was silent at first, and then replied,
Man, fuck NASA! Fuck the Army! Fuck this satellite! Fuck this whole mission! I want to get out of here now!
Without any debate, we ran to the rover and drove off back to Charon. When we came back, the sun had already fallen below the horizon, and it was almost completely pitch black. The airlock was open, and Tarkov was standing in front of the module in his suit. Damn it. In the rush, we completely forgot about him. I approached him and started.
Listen, Tarkov, there is something you...
I stopped when I noticed that he was holding something behind his back. But it was too late. He swung and struck me with a sharpened rod. I hit my head on the inside of my helmet and, dazed, fell to the ground. When the ringing in my ears stopped, I saw him and Carver fighting in the dust. I stood up and threw myself into Tarkov, propelling us both a dozen feet away. Before I was able to stand up again, he was already on top of me. We struggled, and just as he got a grip on the lever that was used to release my helmet, I struck his head with a sharp rock. His visor cracked, and while his air was slowly escaping his suit, I picked myself up and grabbed the rod. It was already stained with blood. He lunged at me, but I stabbed him in the chest. He then fell on top of me, and when our helmets touched, he spoke as the last of his air was pulled out from his lungs.
He is not your friend. Follow the voice.
I picked myself up and walked over to Carver. I saw that his suit was punctured in the thigh, and brownish red blood was being sucked out into the airless vacuum all around us. When I brought him inside the Charon, I realized that our first aid kit was gone. He was bleeding a lot, and I managed to slow it down, but I had to treat him properly. I was afraid that if we took off, he would bleed out in zero gravity even faster. "There was a med kit in the Russian thing, wasn't there?" he said. "Yeah," I replied. "Miller, you have to go and get it." "Fuck, it's not that far from here, is it?" said Carver. "No, it's not." "Are you sure you can hold on until I get back?" I asked. "Yeah, just go." So I went. "Don't die on me, Carver." "That's an order," I said before leaving. As I said, it didn't take long until I reached the Russian lander, but it felt like ages. Throughout the whole journey, I waited for something to jump out of the darkness around me. I wasn't surprised when I saw that the suit that was previously hanging on the wall was now missing. But still, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I took their medkit and headed back as soon as I could. But I couldn't stop thinking about Tarkov's last words. "He is not your friend. Follow the voice. I kept repeating inside my head. I then switched the channel on my radio to the one we had heard the incomprehensible noise on. It was still on. I realized that it was stronger in one particular direction. Follow the voice, I said to myself. Was this the voice Tarkov meant? Who is not my friend? Tarkov? Carver? The mission commander back at Earth? I had to find out. I drove off in the direction of the signal. After driving for at least 15 minutes, I reached a small crater about 30 feet in diameter. With my headlight on, I immediately saw that something was inside, but I couldn't recognize it yet. I stepped over the edge, walked into the crater, and switched my light to full intensity. I stood there, paralyzed with raw terror for what felt like hours. There was a rectangular block of the same material as the pyramid in the center of the crater. A body was lying on top of it. Its limbs were contorted in the most twisted and gruesome way possible. His eyes were missing, and in their place were only 2 gaping holes. It was Carver. There was a small box stuffed inside his mouth. It was the black box from the satellite. I took the box and ran out of there as fast as I could. Carver was dead. If Carver was dead, who was the Carver I left back in the Charon? He is not your friend, was the only thing I had on my mind the rest of the way back. When I returned, Tarkov's body was gone, but Carver was still there, lying, bleeding. But it wasn't Carver. What was that thing? "Thank God you're back, Miller," said Carver. Not Carver. Carver was dead, mutilated, dead. "Miller, are you all right?" continued Not Carver. "Yeah, I've got the kit," I replied. He couldn't know that I know. It couldn't know. I treated its wound, and the bleeding finally stopped. I strapped him in, strapped it in, and then strapped myself in. I didn't tell it that I had found the black box. I didn't tell it that I found him. With the engine roaring below us, the Charon split in half, and the crew compartment pushed us up into the void while the legs stayed planted on the lunar dust eternally. Now, I already wrote on several occasions that I had felt minutes pass as if they were hours. The ascent and rendezvous took only a bit more than a dozen minutes. But those minutes felt like decades. I wanted to scream so loud that my lungs would break, and I wanted to vomit, but I couldn't, because it would find out. I wanted to black out, but I couldn't. I had to save Ackerman. After several lifetimes, we finally docked with Ackerman and the Trinity. Throughout the whole ordeal, we kept him updated. But meeting him was different. He was scared. But I was scared even more. He didn't know that Carver was not Carver. I did. I unstrapped first and pushed Ackerman out of the docking tunnel. I kicked Carver, not Carver, right in the face when he followed. I closed the docking tunnel behind me. "What the hell are you doing, Miller? What is wrong with you?" shouted Ackerman and slammed me to the wall of the command module. "Don't open it, Mike. It's not Carver. The thing in the LEM is not Carver. Do you understand?" I shouted back in pain. Even though he was a battle-hardened soldier, Ackerman finally broke into tears. I floated past him over to the controls, and before I undocked the Charon, I glanced at the docking tunnel window one last time. There it was. A thing with Carver's face and body. But not Carver. Staring at us. But his eyes were completely smooth and black as night itself. He opened his mouth in a way that was simply not possible for a human, and let out a loud, disturbing screech that I wish I could forget so much. In a heartbeat, it turned to dead silence as the Charon detached from the CSM and drifted into the void. Me and Ackerman didn't say a single word throughout the 3-day journey back to Earth. We were placed in quarantine for months after we came back home. Nobody ever explained to us what happened on that mission. I never learned what was in the black box. Honestly, I didn't want to know, after all I experienced. But whatever was there was apparently enough to cancel all other missions to the moon and beyond. They eventually released us and made it very clear that we're never supposed to talk about it. I never saw Ackerman from that day on. The only time I talked about him was when a pair of men in suits came to my home one day, a couple of years after the mission. "Captain Miller, have you been in touch with Lieutenant Ackerman lately?" one of them asked after we exchanged our greeting. "No, I never spoke or heard from him since the mission." "Did something happen?" I replied. "I'm sorry to tell you, but Lieutenant Ackerman was found dead in a nearby forest yesterday." I had to sit down. I didn't know him that well, but we spent a considerable amount of time together in training, and we lived through hell itself together. So it was more than enough for me to consider him a friend. Poor Mike. "How did he die?" I asked. "We don't know yet, but he had multiple fractures on all of his limbs, and his eyes were gouged out." Part 2. My search for the truth had finally yielded some success. Oh, where do I even start? I've mentioned that my grandfather knew some people here and there. He even introduced me to some of them, and I convinced myself to contact one such person who works at NASA. Unfortunately, he couldn't help me, but he gave me a contact for someone who possibly can. The other person didn't help me either, but they bounced me back and forth between about 10 other people, until I finally met this guy who actually knew what I was talking about. Well, I mean, I didn't meet him, only on the internet, but you get it. Obviously, I won't reveal his identity or any more information than what I'm going to write here. He wasn't very friendly when I first got in touch with him. When I asked him if he knew anything about Dawnbreaker, he almost hung up straight away.
"Who told you about this? You're playing with things you don't understand, young man."
Jacob Miller was my grandfather, I explained. He went silent for a few seconds.
"I see. I suppose we wouldn't be able to hide this forever. I couldn't help you. Not because you asked me, but because it's time. But I warn you, there are things you don't want to know."
He mailed me a flash drive, and in a very complicated way explained to me what to do with it. The drive was actually just a dummy, and after I took it apart, it revealed a micro SD card. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing by posting it to the internet, because what you're about to hear isn't going to give you many answers, but open even more questions. The SD card contained a transcript of what was probably an audio recording in Russian. Same as with my grandfather's message. I'll translate the contents below. Material designation IEM663. Source: record designation EM13 at First Dawn 1. Note: Translated from Russian by... Damn piece of crap. Is it working? Oh, thank God it is. I apologize for my rude introduction. My name is Leonid Ivanovich Tarkov. I was a cosmonaut on the Kamchatka station. Now, let's cut the crap and get straight to the point. You know that we are here, and you've been spying on us with your little Stay Putnik for a while. And while I hate giving this to you, I hope you'll use this information well. Because I have no other hope. In case you've really been living under a rock, I'll explain what's going on. We've been here for 2 months now. Me, Lenko, Novak, and Commander Polyakov. God bless their souls. Our station is tiny but serves us well. It is a small dome with 4 rooms, a laboratory, a storage room, machine room, and a central living area. Our purpose was to research the moon and its structures. Long before you, Americans, found out, we already knew about the crater anomaly. On every other celestial body, the size and depth of a crater vary depending on the strength of the impact. But their shape should stay consistent. But on the moon, it is not like this. The craters here are too shallow. They never extend below a certain depth. We placed this station in one particularly large and deep crater with hopes to learn about this curious phenomenon. All was going well until we started digging. It was the 64th day of the expedition. We all gathered there to watch the result of our hard work. The drill was a true engineering marvel, designed specifically for this mission. The plan was to drill a hole as deep as we could.
Ready to start rolling, comrades?
Excitedly asked Lenko, our engineer. We all cheered, and after he hit the switch, the drill came to life. Silence transitioned to buzzing, buzzing transitioned to spinning, and spinning transitioned to drilling. I was very proud of being here, doing a service to the Union. But I looked forward to returning to Earth. This was the first step to our journey home. After we made sure that all was going well, we started packing and heading home. Naturally, Lenko was last, since he behaved like if the drill was his little child he must watch over.
What do you guys think is down there?
He asked as he rushed to catch up with us.
Our equipment couldn't come up with anything below some 5 meters under the surface, so there must be a layer of some very dense mineral, or perhaps some unknown element. Who knows?
Elaborated Novak, our geologist.
I think we're going to find cheese,
I said, and we all laughed. Even Commander Polyakov chuckled. I was wrong. We were all so wrong. The drill jammed the next day. Lenko and Novak went there to elaborate, while I stayed at the base with the commander. He didn't talk much, and when he did, it was mostly to criticize someone. He was the kind of person who wasn't satisfied no matter what you did, but deep down he cared for us, and we respected him for that. Lenko and Novak later returned with a handful of sharp black rocks, and rather surprising news. As we predicted, about 4 meters below the surface there's a layer of this immensely hard black material. It is so hard, in fact, that it broke the drill head, explained Novak.
So, do you have any idea what it is? Asked the commander.
Not yet. It might be some metastable crystalline mineral formed under high pressure, but we won't know what it is until I have a look at it. The next few days were very interesting. Me and Lenko spent almost all the time by replacing the drill heads. Novak was completely consumed by studying that strange material. The fact that he didn't make much progress only fueled his amazement. I was just doing some maintenance on the drill with Lenko when the drill suddenly plummeted down the hole. almost taking us with it.
Did you see that?
Asked Lenko with confusion.
Of course I did, you idiot. It almost pulled me into that hole, in case you didn't notice.
I responded. I then realized he probably didn't mean the drill, and I thought he was going to say something. But he didn't. I looked into the hole. I pulled a glow stick out of the pocket of my suit, cracked it, and dropped it into the hole. It fell into some sort of a cavity. The rest of the team arrived shortly after, and the commander started cursing at the drill, then at us, and finally, he congratulated us for making the first major discovery on this rock. I knew what was going to happen next.
Prepare your gear and get some sleep. We're going down there tomorrow,
said Polyakov. When we returned to Kamchatka, Lenko insisted that he needed to service the exterior equipment. I thought that it was a bit odd, because he serviced the exterior 2 days prior, but our equipment breaks all the time, so I didn't consider it as a big deal. I wanted to stay with him so he wouldn't be left alone outside, but he refused with any possibility of convincing him. So I gave up on that. He returned inside some 30 minutes after we did, anyway. However, a couple of minutes after he came back, we heard a bang from the airlock. Then another. We rushed there, and Novak took a look out of the window. He widened his eyes and scanned the outside with a blank expression on his face. "What is it?" I don't know," he replied. "Lenko, do you know what's going on? You returned last," inquired the commander. "No, I swear I have no idea what that was," he answered. Novak continued watching the outside for a few seconds, and then went back to continue his work. So we did as well. The next day, we descended down the hole. The commander went down first, and then I followed. I rappelled down some 4 meters when I reached the layer of the black material. As if it wasn't hard enough already to fit through the narrow opening with the suit on, I had to be careful not to cut the suit on the sharp, jagged edges of the dark substance. I then got into a hollow section and descended some further 10 meters down, until I hit solid ground. It was pitch black, but with my headlight on, I saw that we were in a sort of cavern or dome. The walls were out of sight, but the floor was the same material like the ceiling. The drill was down there. It had collapsed down the hole when the ceiling gave way. We waited for the rest of the team and then headed into the darkness. After a few minutes, we sighted the wall. It was made out of the same material as I expected.
Do you have any idea what this is, Novak?
Asked the commander.
I can't figure it out. It's like a really tight-packed crystal, but I couldn't find out what it is made out of. It's completely inert, doesn't melt, and doesn't conduct heat very well,
he explained in return. We followed the wall and circled the whole cavity until we came back to where we started. The walls, the ceiling, and the floor were just this completely smooth black material. We headed back to the opening. However, on our way back, we came across another opening in the ground. There was a ramp that went down, like a spiral. And after hesitating for a while, we walked down. We descended into another, smaller cavity, where tunnels extended in 4 directions, like crossroads. Nobody asked the obvious question. This wasn't a natural formation. There were 4 of us and 4 tunnels. One might think we would split up to cover more ground, but again, we were soldiers, not a bunch of stupid school children, and so we stuck together. We walked for maybe 40 minutes. We passed several other intersections. The whole place seemed like a maze or a web of tunnels, and it would be really easy to get lost here. So, each time we passed an intersection, we left a glow stick in the mouth of the tunnel we came from. The whole place was eerie, and the farther we went, the more uneasy I felt. Somewhere, deep in my mind, I felt that we were not supposed to be here. We just came to maybe the 10th or 11th intersection. We continued straight, but after a couple of steps, I noticed that Lenko wasn't by my side anymore. I turned back to see him looking into one of the side tunnels at the intersection.
Guys, stop.
I spoke to the radio.
Lenko, what is it?
He turned to face us and said,
I don't know. Guys, I don't feel well. We need to go back. Something is not right down here.
What followed happened so fast, but I felt like I was watching a slow-motion video. At one moment, he stood there, looking at us. But in the next moment, he was gone. Something pulled him into the tunnel. We ran back, and I wanted to follow, but the commander pulled me back.
What are you doing? We can't leave him behind!
I shouted.
He's gone. We need to get out. Otherwise, we are all dead.
He said. He was right. This wasn't our world. Whatever took Lenko was still down here with us. We needed to get out. We ran back from where we came from. Running in such low gravity was really awkward, but at least it was easier, so we didn't need to stop and catch our breath, even with our heavy suits on. However, when we reached the next intersection, we stopped nonetheless. The glow stick wasn't there. As we soon learned, all of them were gone. At first, we remembered the way, but at some point, we probably took the wrong route, because we never reached the spiral ramp. We eventually reached something that seemed like a dead end. We wanted to head back, when we all heard and felt a thumping in the distance. There was obviously no air, so the sound probably traveled through the ground. Novak was the first one who panicked.
Fuck, what now? What are we going to do, Commander? Please, we have to do something. I want to go home.
He shouted across the radio. The pounding got louder and louder, or perhaps closer and closer. I was on the verge of panic as well, when I noticed that the wall in front of us wasn't a single piece. There was a groove running from the top to the bottom at the center.
Help me with this,
I said. With a combination of various tools, we managed to pry it open to reveal that the wall was in fact a door. The sound was now so close that I thought that if I looked back, I would have seen the source. But I didn't want to. We squeezed through the door and let it close behind us.
Fuck, that was close. Are you alright?
Asked the commander.
How are we going to return back now?
Asked Novak in response.
We'll find a way,
said the commander.
How? We have no idea where we are, and there's...
The commander cut him off.
We'll find a way.
We walked through another tunnel for some time until we reached a room. It was circular in shape, maybe 15 or 20 meters in diameter. It was filled with concentric rows of black boxes, or tables perhaps. In the center, there was a black, three-sided pyramid. Again, 4 tunnels continued into the unknown at each side, like at the intersections. What was this place? We decided not to waste time and went into one of the tunnels. We probably walked for hours, but our oxygen was almost gone. And not long after we left the circular room, I started to feel it. My mind became cloudy, and my legs felt like jelly. I remember that we eventually reached a room. It was circular in shape, with concentric rows of black tables and a three-sided pyramid in the center. I didn't have any energy left to realize that we returned somehow to the same room we came from. I collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily, struggling for any oxygen left in my air. In the final, desperate measure, I detached my helmet. I took a deep breath, and cold air filled my lungs before I collapsed. I saw something while I was unconscious. I can't remember it clearly, like when you wake up and you remember your dream, but you forget it in a couple of minutes. I remember that I saw some kind of being. I can't remember what it looked like, but I knew that it was sleeping. Then it woke up. "Tarkov!" a voice said at the edge of my consciousness. "Wake up! Wake up!" I woke up to see Novak. "Wake up, Tarkov!" he repeated and shook me. I saw that he had removed his helmet also. Somehow there was air, and we could breathe it. But after all that's happened, it was one of the less surprising facts. "What happened?" I asked. "Thank God you're all right. I don't know, but something is not right with Polyakov," he answered. I stood up and saw him standing in front of the pyramid. "Commander Polyakov!" I shouted. He didn't respond. We started walking towards him with Novak. "I passed out when we got back here. When I woke up, he was already standing there. He wouldn't respond, and he didn't move an inch. Then I found you and woke you up," explained Novak. Polyakov moved his arm and touched the pyramid. I don't know why I didn't notice it before, but anyway, his helmet was still on. There's no way he had any oxygen left. Suddenly, the surface of the pyramid went black. I mean, it was black even before, but now it was so black that I couldn't even see the surface anymore. Only the outline. It was like if somebody simply tore away a part of space itself. Some sort of black hand appeared in front of the pyramid. I can't comprehend where it came from, but it seemed to extend out from the pyramid itself. It grabbed Polyakov's arm, and in the blink of an eye, it pulled him into the darkness. We turned and ran into the tunnel to our right. A few dozens of meters into the tunnel, I stumbled and fell face down onto the ground, breaking my lamp in the process. The last light in the tunnel disappeared with Novak as he sprinted away, and then I was plunged into darkness. I then heard heavy footsteps behind me. I wanted to stand up and run, but I couldn't. I couldn't take it anymore. I just lay there and awaited my end as the footsteps got closer. The thing got right next to me, and I felt a hand touch my leg. It touched my suit several other times and advanced towards my head. Then, to my horror, it touched my face. It was cold. I imagined the same hand that had just pulled Polyakov into the pyramid. I imagined it dragging me backwards and pulling me inside the pyramid to do terrible things to me. This was it. This was my end. But that didn't happen. "Who is this?" a shaky voice asked. I was startled and I didn't know what to do. It was Lenko's voice. "It's Tarkov," I said after a while. "Thank God I found you. I thought I would die here alone," he said. I stood up and we walked through the tunnel together in pitch darkness. We roamed the tunnels for hours, maybe days, weeks. At first it wasn't so bad because I wasn't alone. We filled the time by talking about various things. We talked about our families, about our jobs, about how we became cosmonauts. At one point, I asked him what happened after he was pulled away from us. He didn't answer, and went silent ever since. It wasn't long until the silence forced me to start questioning each step I took. How did Lenko survive? What happened to Polyakov? But there was one thought that was much stronger than the others. Was it really Lenko next to me? Was it he or that monster with the black hand? I wouldn't know because I couldn't see. Why didn't I have a light? How did he find me? My gratitude for his company shifted to terror. Each second, my desperation to see any light grew stronger. I couldn't bear it anymore. I suddenly tripped and fell. "Are you all right, Tarkov?" asked Lenko. "I tripped on something," I explained. I turned and with my hands proceeded to feel the object that caused my fall. It was highly irregular, but sometimes symmetrical. In some places it was soft and flexible, while at others it was cold and smooth. I then realized what it was. A spacesuit. I eventually found the lamp, and after some struggling, I detached it from the suit. At first, to my surprise, I was afraid to turn it on. I was afraid to see what was in the darkness all around us. I was afraid to see who was in this spacesuit. But I did it anyway. The brightness blinded my eyes, and after they adapted to the light, I saw Novak's face in the suit, and Lenko standing over us. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, I felt that his eyes were somehow unnatural. Something wasn't right about them. I was just on the verge of realizing what it was, when the body beside me twitched and took a long, deep breath. "Novak, are you okay? How did you get here?" I asked. He was very disoriented. I don't remember. Is that..." he said and looked at Lenko. He then looked at me and we both stood up. I thought you guys were dead," he said. "So did we," I answered. I was delighted to finally see a human face, but it wasn't over. We still had to find a way out. "I ran as far away as I could until I realized you weren't following me. I wanted to head back for you, but I thought that you were gone as well. I can't remember what happened next. My head hurts just from trying to think about it," explained Novak. After managing to get a closer look at him, I realized that he was looking terrible, sick perhaps. His eyes were red and he was completely pale. Something was wrong with him. After a few hours, we decided to stop and take a break. I finally drifted into sleep. This time I didn't have any dreams, just pitch darkness. It was that more terrifying because it reminded me of the time I spent in the dark. I was woken up by something. It was Novak. He gestured to me to stay silent. I saw Lenko sleeping a few meters away.
"Tarkov, listen," he whispered. "We need to go now. We need to get away from him."
"What are you talking about? Are you crazy?" I whispered back.
"Tarkov, do you remember the banging back at the station?"
he asked.
"When I looked out of the window, I saw something, but at that point I thought that my mind was playing tricks on me, so I stayed silent," he explained. "In the far distance, I saw a figure, standing with its back turned to us. It was walking away, but it stopped when I focused my eyes on it. It turned and looked at me. It was him! It was Lenko!"
Novak finished his revelation. I took a minute to process all of this. I then nodded and silently stood up. We proceeded to carefully walk away. Something was wrong with this place. Something I can't explain. People appeared, people disappeared. If what Novak was saying was true, was the person behind us Lenko? If not, what was it? Was Novak telling the truth? Was it really Novak? Or something else? I couldn't trust anyone. I didn't even trust myself. It all felt so unreal, but so real at the same time. I had so many questions I didn't want answers to. I felt like I would break at this point. I felt as if the walls of the tunnel were collapsing on me, getting tighter and tighter each second. I wanted so desperately to get out. I wanted to go home. But I was so far away from home. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Are you my friend, Tarkov?" asked Lenko. I turned to see him standing right behind Novak, who was just behind me. I didn't know what to do. Of course I'm your friend," I responded. "Good," he said. I looked in his eyes and realized what was wrong with them. They were pitch black. "What are you?" I exclaimed. "We are everything," he said in an unsettling, unnatural voice. He then opened his mouth impossibly wide and clamped around Novak's neck, engulfing his head in its throat. Novak screamed in agony, but his screams were muffled by the thing's flesh. I turned to run while I heard ear-piercing roars and screeches behind me. I was too afraid to look back, but I felt that it was getting closer. I ran through the tunnel for a while, until I reached an intersection. In the center, there was a spiral ramp. My heart dropped. This could be where we came from. It had to be. I ascended the ramp, but the higher I got, the harder it was for me to breathe. I put my helmet back on and reached a big room. In the ceiling, there was a small ray of sunlight coming from the hole. I climbed out. I was finally out, but I didn't have time to celebrate. I was out of oxygen. What was left was only the air that became trapped in my suit as I reattached my helmet. My reserves were completely out. I went to walk back to the base when I froze. I dropped to my knees. The base was gone. Like it was never there. Both of our landers were there.
but the base itself was gone. I crawled into one of the landers. I almost suffocated on the way, but I made it. To whoever receives this, I'm presumably the last survivor of the Kamchatka expedition. I'm sending out this transmission in case I don't make it. I think that whatever is down there was asleep for a long time, but we woke it up. The engine is warming up now, but I'm afraid I'm out of time. I can see him outside. He's getting closer. God help me. End of record.
To think about it, I can't sleep knowing that our moon is something unnatural. Something hiding so many terrifying truths. Whenever you take a look outside at the night sky, remember that sometimes the most mysterious and terrifying things are hidden in plain sight.
Hey sci-fi horror fans, it's Thomas. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Craving for another scary story? Click on that video on your screen. Until next time everyone, and remember, stay cosmic.